Welcome back, guys, to another video on the Modular Assistant Registry Kernel, or M.A.R.K for short. It's been a while, I know, pretty crazy, but I have gotten quite a bit done, and I want to share that with you today. Now, before I start this video, I just want to clear some stuff up from the last video. I didn't have that much time to make that last video, so that's why it's a little rushed, and yeah, and I hadn't stopped to think about choosing my words more carefully. But one thing that I did want to mention is that uh, I just watched it over, and when I said leader, I haven't actually called myself leader of the robotics team outside of that video at all. So I just want to clear up that it sounded a little authoritarian when I watched it back just now. And it's not a permanent position. We chose it just because for the past few days, or for the past few building sessions, there's just been a bunch of ninth graders wandering around like gamers without a purpose, without a PC. So, no, like like a bunch of zombies basically, like just playing Clash Royale, and we needed them to get stuff done. So, just to clear some stuff up, I did work on this slide afterwards, and I had for the main hardware task something different than this to work on the wheels, but then Ben got that done in his free time along with the extension hub. So yeah, so this is just like a slide that I made that I'm going to present in like 5 minutes before we get started, just to make sure everybody has something to knows what they're doing. So yeah, here are just the roles. Main hardware task is I'm just gonna leave that to Ben to tell them what to do, but I'm going to make sure that Ben tells them what to do. Otherwise, like that's a problem. And then Ahanoff and I are gonna start working on coding, because now that the extension hub is finally installed and the wheels are all hooked up, we're ready to start coding. And then of course, the other kids who have nothing to do will continue to disassemble parts from the old robots for scraps, which shouldn't take too long. And then they will learn how to CAD and watch some of Eric Sig's videos on doing that stuff. And of course, if they wanted to, um, they want to join software, just let me know. And that's literally all I'm gonna say. Okay, so back to M.A.R.K. So I did a few changes. I'm not sure where I left off, so let me just check that out. So just give me a second. That way I can actually make a video that isn't repetitive. Okay, so I just realized there's just a ton of stuff that I haven't updated you guys on, so let's just get started with that now. So first off, I added a package info that just says the main. Here, I'll just read it to you guys. The main package for the kernel of M.A.R.K. This is where M.A.R.K's core resides, which is used to connect the registry, connect and register all of his plugins. Then, of course, we have the main class. And in here, the main class, I have here's just some information on it. The base of all M.A.R.K core games. Nope, that's not what I meant. Base of all M.A.R.K core plugins slash no processes slash plugins. This class is the initial starting point of the M.A.R.K Assistant Registry Kernel. And of course, I'm the author of this note, so yeah. So next we have some version info. Now let's take a look at this. This is a custom interface, documented interface that I created. It just allows easy documentation of additions and revisions to M.A.R.K core capabilities. So this just has a couple of things. First of all, it's of course called the version info because that's what it is, and of course it has the version at which this is being written in, and then the date at which this was written, and then the first version this class or function was introduced, and then the contributors, right? So if we just go over here and and look at the version info, you can see that the version is 1.0, release date is today, because I just added this feature today, the version info thing today. It's not a feature, just the version info interface today. And since version 1.0, because we're still on 1.0, and of course the contributor is me. If there were other contributors, I'd just add a new line called, let's say my friend Ahanaf Zaman was working on it, right? And just do that. It's pretty simple, but he's not, so yeah, bye-bye. So then, of course, now that we've got this class info out of the way, we have just some notes. Wakes mark core and executes all initialization methods. So the wake method first adds this add shutdown. It first adds the shutdown hook, which means that whenever this program is terminated, now this should say terminate, or you know what, whoops, this should, let's refactor and rename, so that says terminate program, and whenever it's terminated, it will kill all plugins, right? It'll destroy all of them, and I'll get to that in a second. So then after that, we just pre-init, init, post-init. Now I'm not sure if I explained this, but essentially here are here's why we have 3 stages. So for processes, pre-init is for processes that do not depend on M.A.R.K core components. Then the initialization method is for processes that depend on processes initialized in the pre-initialization method. And then the post-init method is for initialization sequences that might depend on processes initialized in the init method, or for registering components from external files to the main program. Let me just space some of this out so that's more readable. So essentially the 3 stages, there's 3 stages of the initialization sequence, and depending on whether the specific initialization sequence depends on another initialization sequence, determines which sequence it belongs to. So there's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Initialization sequences in stage 2 depend on initialization sequences in stage 1. Basically, if I didn't do that, if the initialization sequence that depended on, let's say initialization, so if initialization sequence, let's just say A, depends on initialization sequence B, and if we did initialization sequence A before we executed initialization sequence B, then it wouldn't work. It would throw an error, right? So essentially, what this is for is just so that it just separates them, just to prevent errors. And then, of course, the terminate program, which just iterates through all of the plugins and destroys them. And of course, it doesn't destroy the actual program, it destroys the process, which I will get to later. So after we've initialized, it just says some stuff, and then we'll just go over to the input handler.listen. Now, I'm not sure if I covered the organization in the last video I made on M.A.R.K, but I'll just cover it just in case. The input handler is separate from the main class because it handles the input. It does its separate thing, and M.A.R.K core I felt should only handle like the initialization, crap, that stuff. So also, I forgot to mention, there is an init package for initialization package. You can see I just have some version info and some, the initialization of all default files is in the IO file registry, not including plugins, of course. So then the launcher, just some stuff here. And the plugin registry, launcher just has a main method and creates the instance of M.A.R.K, and then the plugin registry just registers all the plugins into the system. And I'll go over this briefly. So there's the initialization method, and the initialization method is separate from the register method because the initialization method executes each plugin while the register method registers each plugin into the system. So how does this work? Well, it creates a file array, so this means this file can be any type, a text file, a jar file, a zip file, any of those. And that file is named is that file array stores all of the plugins. Now, it will create this file array with the path name of plugins. What does this mean? Well, that means that all of the files that it will be scanning will be in this plugins folder, which is in the root directory, as you can see, and it holds this one plugin demo called display demo.jar. Now, let's just go through this one line. Files. This files array called files is equal to a new files array that just lists all the files within this plugin directory, right? Plugins directory or folder. And then of course we have this assert. This asserts files does not equal to null line. That just makes sure that the files array isn't empty, which would only happen if there are no plugins installed, in which case the files array would be empty because there are no files to scan, in which case it would not iterate through the files array. Now, in the for loop, we just iterate through all the files, and then we check if the file is a file, and then we essentially index that file as a file into this hash map of all plugins. Now, this all plugins hash map stores the file and the process, and I'll get to the process in a bit. So we just index that file into the all plugins hash map, and then we just set the process equal to null because we haven't created that yet, and then we just state that it has successfully registered, so we can just say successfully registered. Now, after it registers the file, which means that it scans all of the files inside of the plugins directory and puts it into the hash map, then we are going to go through the plugin registry initialization sequence, which essentially executes each plugin along with creating and indexing each associated process, right? So let's go through this. What do I mean by execute? Well, it just means it runs the program, right? And it runs on a separate JVM. What do I mean by indexing? The process, I just mean like the process of it being run is stored. The process of it being run is stored inside of that hash map so that it can be altered later on. For example, in this terminate method where it accesses the process and then it destroys it. That way it can terminate the program. So let's start it off. So it iterates through all the registered plugins. By the way, all this code I created myself. I'm very proud of it. But anyways, it loops through all of the files inside of the plugins, inside of all of the plugins stored in the hash map. And the first order of business is to create a process builder. Now, this process builder, you can kind of say that it's like a list of all of the things you are about to do, right? So it's like a plan basically. So we create a new process builder with the commands java -jar and then the name of the jar file. And you can run this command inside of the command prompt. All it does is it executes a jar file. It builds a jar file builds the jar file associated with the name specified. In this case, that jar file is the file that is being iterated through in the hash map in this for loop. So once it's created this process builder with the specification of with the command specification of executing the specific jar file instead of the iteration. It sets the preferred working directory, which is plugins, and then it creates a process called P. Now this process is what's going to be executed because the process is being equal to the process builder. So process builder.start just means that we've built the process, we've created the plan of what we're about to do, and now we're going to execute that plan. We're going to do that. We're going to follow through with that plan. And so this process builder.start just means we're following through with this plan stated in this list of things that we need to do, called the process builder list. And then we're storing that list inside of this process P, and then we just put that inside of the hash map for later use, for example, shutting down the process. And then once that iteration is finished, it just successfully states that it successfully built it, which is great. Okay. Next up, after the so let's go back to the input handler. And the input handler just does what it normally did. It checks what it's going to do with the input, and that's literally it. It decides what it's going to do with the input. Is it going to invoke a custom response, in which case it could either invoke a custom response determined in the text file, or it could invoke a custom response that triggers an action, for example, searching for a specific thing. So, for example, when I run this program, a custom action would be a question, right? Just ignore this JFrame. So let's say I want to ask who is the, so in the console, not sure if you can see it, I'm searching who is the 24th President of the United States. When I press enter, it'll determine that's a custom action because it's a question, and it'll Google it. So that's like a custom response that invokes an action. Custom response that invokes a custom response that invokes, well, a custom verbal response would be, let's say, saying hello, which responds with hello, as you can see. And capitalization doesn't matter. Another thing, for example, is when were you born? Obviously. And it states when he was born, September 24th, 2021, which is when I first created this project and when I first had the idea. To find that day, I just had to look through my GitHub commits. But anyways, and here is the display that I was talking about. This display is actually a completely separate program. It's one of the plugins that was registered and initialized and executed by our program. And because we indexed that process so that we can terminate all programs later, you can see in my taskbar down here, where it shows that it's being opened when I stop this program, you can see it also stops the plugins program, which is great. So when the main program is terminated, all plugins are terminated. Okay. So, it does that stuff. And then it does what I have shown you before. One of the paths, which is, the neural network and stuff, and then the custom response. But that's pretty much it. And I did set up some other stuff like terminal commands, stuff like this that just helps. Like this action class, which helps set up for future stuff. It helps set up, it works, so the action object is for determining what kind of action you have. So you have two attributes. One is the type of action it is, and the other one is the info associated with it. So for example, searching on the web browser is an action, so that would be type search, and then the info would be whatever you're searching for on the internet. Right, and of course that would apply to any other type of action that I would be making, but I haven't put that into that's not a feature yet. There's only one action feature, that's the searching feature. But other than that, Nothing new really. Very proud of my documentation. Alright, so that's my alarm because I was making waffles, and hope you guys have a great day. Thank you, and goodbye.